Welcome to the Viking Age podcast. It's the official podcast of the VikingAge.com. My name is Chris Schad. I write for the Viking Age Zone Coverage, Bring Me the News, and the Brookings Register. We do this every Monday with a late week episode right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel. We're also in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day. But however you consume us, make sure you rate, comment, like, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode and we can spread the word to the masses. Today's guest covers the NFL draft for NFL Media, which includes NFL.com, and he has also been featured on Yahoo. His name is Eric Edholm. Eric, how have you been, man? How's this post-draft cycle treating you?
I got a few days off. It was incredible, right? So that alone made the whole run up to the draft cycle well worth it. No, it's good. Every year is a different. That's what I love about the draft. You know, every draft has its own personality, its own theme, if you will. You know, that the players at the top of the draft this year will be at the bottom of the draft in 2 years, in most cases anyway. So, you know, it's constantly giving us a fresh sort of cycle, and we start over and start working on the 25 kids pretty soon here.
Yeah, I'm giving you a bit of a chance at redemption before we start here because my old podcast, The Homer Horn, you were the last guest to ever be on that podcast before I started going to the Viking Age full time.
Wow.
And we had discussed last year's draft class, and we had, you know, you were pretty positive. You're like, you know, nothing really made me stand up or whatever. And I don't remember what the grade was. I think it was like a D or an F, but everybody in Vikingville were like, who is this guy? So I don't know if you're a little more gentle about this draft class or what, but like I said, we're giving you a shot at redemption today.
Yeah, you know, that's very kind of you. It's very thoughtful. And to any Vikings fans who are listening are like, you know, forget this dude, right? Like, just give me a chance. I promise you, I don't have an anti-Vikings bias or, you know, Buccaneers or Chargers or any of these teams. Like, I tell people this all the time. Like, I'm a fan of all 32 teams. I kind of grew up a Bears fan, kind of grew up a Patriots fan. I was sort of divided between the two cities. I promise I don't hate anyone's team. I really don't. I root for bad teams to become good and vice versa. So, you know, I appreciate the chance at redeeming my semi-good name, I would say.
You live in Chicago. You got a JJ McCarthy dartboard. I mean, there's a Kirk Cousins.
He's from right down the road. He's a local. Yeah.
Yeah. You stuck a pin right in Kirk Cousins' Achilles last October. We know about you.
Forget Tommy Kramer. I go way back. I'm old, you know, right?
Let's start here. Obviously, Vikings' first pick was JJ McCarthy, the 10th overall pick in the draft. You know, everybody came in. They thought the Vikings would have to give up multiple first rounders. They wanted Drake May. How do you think this played out with the Vikings getting JJ McCarthy over Drake May and being able to keep a lot of that draft capital as well?
Yeah, that to me is the biggest thing, right? Obviously, I wouldn't have loved the idea of McCarthy. McCarthy was my number 18 overall prospect. So, you know, still in the top 20, still he was I guess he might have been my first second round grade. I typically only have about 15 to 18 first round grades in any given year. So that's, you know, pretty common right at the end of that. Taking him at that spot, I didn't think was a reach given the importance of the position. But your point is the biggest one, I think, which is we don't always factor in, I should say, you know, when extreme cases like Trey Lance and people like that who, you know, barely see the field. You know, we tend to factor those things in, but you can't ignore the cost of moving up, especially if a quarterback isn't the best in his class, or, you know, in a rare year, the second best. I mean, those are the ones that end up being worth it, of course. And, you know, I talk out of both sides of my mouth. On the one hand, I say, hey, look, if you have conviction on a player, do whatever it takes to get up and get him, especially at, you know, quarterback, pass rusher, left tackle, right tackle, corner, what have you, those premium positions, wide receiver in some cases, you know. But on the other hand, that can really bite you. You know, you lose, even if the prospect hits, it's costly, but if they don't hit, that's obviously a pretty big thing. So, you know, the way the board went, where Penix was the surprise fourth quarterback off the board, I thought he'd be the fifth, but, you know, just flip those two around. You know, it really left him in an awkward spot. Chicago at number 9 had been talking trade down for so long. They had to be sweating that out. They knew they weren't going to get a deal probably with a division rival, although some of those division rivals have done deals before. So to be able to just slide up a very incremental one slot, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So, that was, I think, the winning aspect of the whole deal. And then on top of it, I think he landed in probably the best quarterback environment of any rookie quarterback. Maybe you could make an argument the Bears, but I would argue Minnesota is as strong, including play caller, play makers, all the elements that are involved, offensive line, et cetera. It's a great spot. So that boosts his value. And that's another way to look at the draft. This isn't just where do you have him ranked and where was he picked? No, there are other variables, I should say, that affect how much I like a situation.
Yeah, because it seemed like a lot of the quarterbacks as well, they kind of got inflated throughout the draft process. Like they were talking about McCarthy as a top 5 pick. Sean Payton's over there in Denver, like, oh yeah, we made the Vikings trade up a bit. No, you didn't. Let's just be honest right there. You wanted to trade up. There are rumors that you called the Bears. You wound up with Bo Nix. Like those 6 quarterbacks. Was it 6? I'm trying to. We have
6 and 12.
Daniels. Yeah, 6 and 12. Was that like a panic run on quarterbacks, or what did you think about that run at the top of the draft?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, obviously, if it was 6 and 18, would that be a massive difference? I mean, part of it was based on where Denver was picking. I don't think anyone would have selected Bo Nix in the next 10 picks, right? I mean, there could have been a trade-up situation. There were still a few teams that missed out on quarterbacks, but the fact that it was all condensed, that it was basically every other pick was a quarterback when you average it out there, and we never had that before. 5 and 15 in the Trevor Lawrence draft. I mentioned Trey Lance. Obviously, he's one of the guys that hasn't yet fulfilled his potential. Who knows if he ever will? That was the cautionary draft, the one that everybody kind of said, hey, look, guys, maybe this year's class isn't all it's cracked up to be. The NFL didn't care. They didn't listen, and they may be right. Like, I mean, who's to say that Caleb Williams can't succeed in Chicago? A guy like JJ in a really strong situation in Minnesota, I feel. I said all along, Bo Nix and Sean Payton felt like the best marriage potential of all these teams that Knicks potentially could go to. So, there's some interesting fits there. Drake May's going to have to wait a little bit. Jaden Daniels is going to have to exercise some patience. We don't know with Penix that whole situation is too hard to read, but maybe it is a good situation. Maybe it is a good draft for quarterbacks. And I can't say right now whether it ends up being a horrible reach or a series of reaches in this draft, but it's the first time it's happened, and that alone makes you a little bit suspicious.
The last question I have about McCarthy is the one that everybody's asking here in Minnesota. Everybody sees Sam Darnold. They're freaking out because nobody wants Sam Darnold to start at quarterback except for Kevin O'Connell. How quickly do you think JJ McCarthy can adapt to the NFL game? And how quickly do you think he can become the starting quarterback in Minnesota?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. We saw him up in Michigan kind of split time with I'm blanking on his name now. Cade McNamara. Is that right? Am I saying that right? Yes.
Yes.
Wrong. Yes, that's his name, right?
Yeah.
I went to Iowa, right? Okay, I'm just making sure. As soon as I said it, it didn't sound right, so I apologize if I'm saying his name wrong. But yeah, we saw him split time and then kind of win the job over, and really kind of sink his teeth into the team. And he's sort of in between. I mean, obviously, you have to factor in how well Darnold plays, how much of a difference terminology-wise there is, and just sort of route concept wise, is it vastly different from what they're going to run in Minnesota versus what they ran with the Wolverines? I don't think there's going to be such a chasm between what he's learned before and what he's going to learn. I think it's going to be more about the depth of the protections. They may have had 4 or 5 pass protections at Michigan, and even for a sophisticated guy like Jim Harbaugh has been in the league, even if assuming it's a little more than that or a little more in depth, it's going to be that 201, 301 level education coming up here and crammed into a short period of time. So It's funny because obviously Minnesota, even in a tough division, probably feels like, hey, we should see if we're going to compete this year. Are we going to have a shot at winning the division or making the playoffs? And that'll obviously dictate part of it too. Has Darnold won the job and then kind of hit a wall? Has he progressively gotten better? Did he start horribly? We don't even know the schedule yet, so it's a little tricky as to sort of predicting like what week might he take over. Is he going to be a week 1 guy? Is he going to be a week 8 guy? Hard to really know. I think given the fact that McCarthy came off as a very mature, grounded guy in interviews, won rave reviews from teammates and coaches alike during the process as well, is sort of viewed as one of these guys with a rare equanimity. When things are kind of chaotic, he has a way of just kind of zeroing in and focusing on the task at hand. And what I love about him too is that he didn't care that this was kind of a offense catered to the run game. He was still the trigger man. He still was counted on in key situations, and he knew what to do when those situations arose. I mean, that's a big thing for a rookie quarterback. I don't think you can say that about every quarterback in this class. So he kind of has a level of preparation, even if he didn't start a billion games in college. He's been in some high leverage situations, 2 OSU games, 3 playoff games, won 2 of them, won a championship. It's just there's some skins on the wall for a guy who really only played, essentially 2.5 years.
So looking at the Vikings' other first-round pick, and I mean, I'm excited about JJ McCarthy, obviously. The whole new quarterback thing is exciting for any franchise. I'm really excited about Dallas Turner to the point where,
Sure.
You had talked before where, hey, if you miss on this guy and you make a big trade up, you're going to be screwed. Well, ESPN's Seth Walder came out and said that this would have been the 4th most expensive trade up for a non-quarterback since 2004. If you mix in the cost of getting the 23rd overall pick. So first of all, for Turner, like what does he bring to the Vikings defense and how can he help their pass rush?
Yeah, kind of a long, explosive athlete at the edge position. And we say long, you may look at his height and say, well, he was only 6'3", but when you have almost 35-inch arms, that's going to help out quite a bit. Super athletic kid. He was able to put weight on at his pro day. Didn't run again at the 40, but for the most part, in the drills at least, looked like he carried that weight very well. Now, that said, before last year, he wasn't exactly an elite sack producer. So, we have to manage our expectations about finishing a little bit. He had some games where he was pretty quiet, where he didn't produce mass pressures and wasn't a handful for the guy lining up opposite him. So there were some games where you felt like, I'd like to see a little bit more, but then you get to the next tape and it's all there. I mean, I think he really kind of came out last season. Prior to this point, he'd always been viewed as a good college player with first round potential. To me, he looked like a first rounder. Now, the cost, as you pointed out, I didn't realize it was quite that expensive, relatively speaking, to be honest. So that's really interesting to hear Seth's take on it because, we tend to pay closer attention, I think, in the moment when it's a quarterback trade. What do they give up? How much is it? Or if it's a top 5 pick or something. When it's a little lower down in the first round and we've been kind of lulled to sleep a little, there weren't a whole lot of trades. It wasn't a whole lot of big movement, especially in the top half of the draft. It's easy to kind of overlook and say, well, they moved up and got their guy. That's good. So that is interesting that they gave up that much. But I also felt like Turner was a top 20 prospect. So once he had gotten past that point, there's a little bit of value regained in the fact that you're getting somebody outside the top 20 that may be a top 20 player on your board. I'm guessing that's how they looked at it. I obviously don't know what their board is, but I'd be shocked if they didn't have a first round grade on him, and you won't make that move if you don't, I don't think so. He still has to work a little to get stronger and add some bulk and body armor and stuff like that. I mean, a full season in the trenches, I could see him maybe wearing down a little bit if he's used too much, but I love the pick. I think it makes a lot of sense and, felt like he's gonna be a perfect fit in a Brian Flores defense and he'll be allowed to, Yeah, there'll be some constraints on what he's asked to do, but there'll also be some things that, maybe wasn't untapped at Alabama that he can perform in the NFL.
Judging by Kevin O'Connell's reaction, like he looked like I compared to this like a dog if you dangle a piece of cheese in front of it or something like that. Because Quasey told him they were training up. He goes, really? Like,
Yeah.
people are putting that over all over the internet. So I assume he was very high. A lot of NFL executives were shocked he didn't go eighth to the Atlanta Falcons. He
Yeah.
decided to take Penix. The other interesting thing I liked about Turner is that Nick Saban, Bill Belichick, and Brian Flores all compared him to Donta Hightower, who
Yep.
obviously was at Alabama. He goes to New England. He's I think like 8 or 10 year starter for the Patriots.
Yeah.
Do you see that in him, or do you see a different type of player?
Well, I saw that quote and I found it pretty interesting. Hightower was a similar type of player. He was maybe a little bit more versatile in college, I guess you'd say. He played, if I recall correctly, and I'm sure someone will correct me on this. If I recall, Dante was a rusher early in his career, who then moved to kind of an off the ball linebacker spot, and added more to his responsibilities in college. And there was this, everybody was saying at the time, like, boy, if this isn't a Bill Belichick player, I don't know what is, right? He was big, he was well built, he looked more like a defensive end than a true sort of stand-up linebacker. And he struggled at first. He got isolated in his career, and was injury prone and sort of looked like a guy who had some bust potential. I think I want to say it was either his second or third year that you started seeing the eye-opening plays. And the famous play I think that he's known for was the blitz against the Falcons in the fourth quarter of that Super Bowl comeback, and seeing that the back had a check release and never actually saw him out there. I mean, those are the kind of things that I don't think Dante Hightower was going to be doing instinctively as a first or second year player, but clearly his football acumen helped, and his athletic traits obviously helped kind of make him this well-rounded player. You saw Dallas Turner occasionally drop into coverage, and you saw him, stand up versus a three-point stance and, different things like that. I wouldn't say that they used him as in like a joker role, like a Micah Parsons or something where he's, lined up all over. But I could see something like that one day. As Hightower got older, and the injuries piled up, his role kind of slimmed back down again. But yeah, as you said, for like a 5-6 year period when he was healthy, he was kind of the glue of that defense. And so, yeah, I mean, I know it's a big name and it's a high level of expectation, but I wouldn't be shocked if Turner, he's a better athlete in terms of quickness and speed than what Dante was. So from that standpoint, and with some similar dimensions, not quite as big, but similar, I could see him fitting into a kind of a hybrid role and being really good at it.
And I don't have the pass rush percentages and the PFF snaps or everything in front of me, but I did jump on Pro Football Reference quick. It looks like, I'm going to assume RLB is rush linebacker. So it looked like
or right linebacker. Yeah.
Yeah,
some of the old positional designations on there are a little odd, but yeah.
Yeah. It looks like he played RLB in some capacity for the first 4 years. Then he moved to middle linebacker.
Yeah.
There's LLB. There's MLB, LL Bean. No, I'm just kidding. ROLB. Yeah, Kirk Cousins, a big LL Bean guy, but not sure where JJ McCarthy shops yet. But yeah, I mean, I think it's an incredible pick. I'm excited to see him in camp. Brian Flores and the Vikings added another player to their defense a little bit later in the draft. That's on day 3, 4th round, 108th overall, Kyrie Jackson. Awesome story. He enrolls at a community college.
Yeah.
Doesn't like football anymore. He almost becomes a professional 2K player, or NBA 2K player rather. Goes to Alabama, not working out, transfer to Oregon. He plays well. He's a 6'4" corner. What do you like about Jackson coming to Minnesota?
Yeah, even though he was at Alabama, it was, I think the first time I probably noticed him was he started the national championship game against Georgia. That would have been 2 years ago, I think, at Alabama. And Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, January of 22, I think. And was like, who's this guy? who's stepping in for their first start of the year? You know, it was one of those because I knew Alabama well. They had a ton of NFL prospects. I knew Georgia that well. And I was watching the game and they did the intros and I went, what? Now he played the next year, kind of a rocky road again, didn't have a ton of playing time, didn't have production. And again, all the things you said, I don't think there were people who viewed him as an NFL prospect, a legit NFL prospect, other than, camp invite, PFA kind of guy, until he started producing for Oregon. So you love these stories, right? And the kids who come via the long route and or out of football. He was in what, 3 different community colleges, or 2 anyway?
Yeah.
I mean, it was 2 as one as a student, I know, but one as a football player, and started playing defensive back. And you see some rawness in him. I mean, obviously, first of all, you just don't find many 6'3", 6'4" corners very often. There were some in New England. And they had some success with guys like Brandon Browner, who they brought in, helped win a Super Bowl against Seattle. They also had some misses, like Razai Dowling, who was, I think, the first pick of the second round a few years back. And so a little bit newer to the position, who's got unusual dimensions, and he did bulk up for his pro day from what I remember. But tested really well too at the combine. I mean, everything looked right. There was a lot of day 3 buzz about him, heading into Saturday. He was one of those players with an unusual trait that you wanted to see. So he went right about where I thought he would, 4th, 5th round. Was kind of what people were thinking. But he's a competitive player. He's obviously this tall, long, rangy guy. And if you have those bigger matchups, that's the kind of player that you love to have on your bench, even if he's not a regular in year 1. There may be certain teams where he ends up playing a lot just because of who they have at receiver. Maybe they've got length, or maybe there's a smaller tight end that he could go against. He is a little older too. I mean, he's a 24-year-old player, I think, who turns 25 at some point, either during the season or this summer, if I recall. So, there's some things working against him, but if you're going to take that kind of a risk on somebody, do it with a player who's, a corner who's 6'4", who can, do the jumping numbers that he did. I forget exactly what it was. And he ran pretty well too. So, is he going to stay a corner? Do they like him better as a safety? Is he kind of a mixture of the two? That's the question. But, I think Brian Flores will figure out a way to use him some way.
And later in the third day, the Vikings looked at their offensive line. That's been kind of an underlying theme in the offseason for Minnesota. Christian Darrisaw is really good. Brian O'Neill's a year removed from that partially torn Achilles. The interior of the offensive line is a bit of a question right now, but you get Walter Rouse in the 6th round out of Oklahoma. Didn't allow a sack last season. Former Stanford kid. Sounds like he's super bright from what everybody is saying. And then you have Michael Jurgens, a 7th round pick out of Wake Forest. He was Pro Football Focus's number 4 guard last year. They're talking a little bit about maybe a switch to center. Are these guys that can provide depth, or are they players that can ascend to a bigger role with time in your mind?
Yeah, I didn't get real excited watching Rouse. I mean, he's very steady. Like, he's just not a player that, he doesn't have too many big ups, too many big downs. I felt like their best left tackle on the roster, meaning Oklahoma's roster, was playing left guard. It was a freshman named Caden Green. He transferred to Missouri, but and the right tackle was pretty good too. It wasn't like I saw him and was blown away, but he's got good length. He kind of moves easily. He's been a left tackle his whole career. He's got great length. He's not anything special athletically, I would say, but the intelligence portion that you mentioned certainly makes up for it. I think that, if you needed to teach him a new position like right tackle and say you're our game day swing tackle, I'm sure he could do it. I wouldn't sit there and hem and haw and bite my fingernails over that idea. I think he can pick it up, right? Is he going to be special at either position? I don't know. But, the guy started for what, 4.5 years or whatever it was. I mean, it was I mean, it's a long time, 4 years at Stanford, and then, or part of 4 years anyway, and then 1 year at Oklahoma. So to me, he's less of an upside play and more of a, you kind of know what you're getting, I guess is the best way I would say it. That's how I would frame it with him. But for a 6th rounder, I mean, you can do a whole lot worse. I think that's the biggest thing. Juergens, I didn't watch a lot of, not a special athlete. There's a reason, even though he's a taller guy, it almost looks like he has kind of a tackle build. Those short arms keep him inside. I think there's no chance of him really being I don't remember the exact membership. I'm kind of trying to look as I think probably 32-inch arms or something like that. Not a player that I spent a lot of time looking at, to be totally honest. But you try to be familiar with these guys, and another smart, tough, competitive guy who, as you pointed out, I think the O-line depth, the starters look pretty darn good. I think there are very few questions overall with that group. But if one goes down, then things obviously change.
Yeah, it looks like they don't have his arm length or anything on mock draftable right now. So
yeah, I'm trying to look, as I got it right here. Hold on. Okay. Yeah, really short wingspan, 77 inches, 32-inch arms. So you'd be hard pressed to play anywhere but guard or most likely center, as you said.
So here's another prospect that's super interesting. And I mean, this is like the typical day 3, like you said, if you're going to take a swing on a guy, you might as well do it here. Levi Drake Rodriguez. When the Vikings took him, my normal co-host Adam Patrick sent me a text and he's like, this guy looks like a WWE guy. Like he's going to be out of the, I mean, it sounds like an insult, but he'll be out of the league. He'll go to WWE and all of a sudden, or, the Performance Center, and they'll have him, showcasing an NXT show in a couple of years. Seems like this guy is more of a project. Awesome backstory again. What do you see him bringing to the Vikings?
Yeah, I reached out to a scout when his name kind of started bubbling up a little bit, and he had a pretty good pro day, and so again, it's not anything like eye popping, but good enough especially for a guy that has some, like you said, some bulk, some musculature. I mean, somebody, and kind of like Kyrie Jackson, somebody who's taken a bit of a circuitous route. I forget the name of the school he played at before Commerce, Texas A&M Commerce, but spent a couple years, elsewhere. Let me see if I can find it as we talk here, but kind of a stocky interior rusher, somebody who I would say he's almost like a poor man's Dwayne Carter, who I think was a 5th-round pick of the Bills. I can't remember exactly where he went, but same sort of player, like highly disruptive, doesn't have that great length, which a lot of interior guys don't. That's why you put him inside. It's less of a problem out there. Somebody who was regarded as having strong hands, promising athleticism, somebody who behind the scenes, you work with every day, and maybe you have something in year 2. At that stage of the draft, those are the kind of players you're kind of looking at, especially this year. This year, with more players returning to school on NIL deals, the transfer portal opening up opportunities for players that may have otherwise entered the draft on a long shot or a whim. A lot of those kids stayed in school. 6th and 7th rounds this year weren't as deep. You didn't hear about as many undrafted players this year with name value, right? That fans recognize. There's almost always 3 or 4 that fans say, how did this guy not get drafted? Other than like Gabe Hall at Baylor and a couple others, I don't think that, Sam Hartman, I guess, at Notre Dame, although I didn't necessarily think, So the point being is that the value of a 6th, 7th round pick this year was a little lower than in normal years. So at this stage of the draft, getting a kind of an interior penetrator who may need a little time in the oven, but could be something in year 2, sign me up. Those are the kind of players I think we're worthy of taking chances on at this point. How's the redemption thing going, by the way? Am I doing enough positivity here on the Vikings to redeem myself?
We haven't asked you for an overall grade yet. We'll get to that in just a minute here.
Fair.
But I did look up Levi Drake Rodriguez's previous school. It is Southwest Assembly of God University. And
That's
I
right. I
think
knew it was I knew it was a religious type thing or something. I didn't want
right.
to. I didn't want to offend anybody or say the wrong name or make up my own name. So I'm glad you were able to scour the internet and find that.
And when I haven't read the whole article yet. I need to do it yet, but I saw a clip. Tyler Fornes posted it out there.
Oh
And he
yeah,
said
I know
like
Tyler.
he took his Bible and he just sat under the tree and he read it and he's like, I need to leave. And yeah, wound up at Texas A&M University Commerce. And
Crazy.
again, another crazy story that you'll hear only in the NFL draft, right?
Yep.
Um,
7 rounds, 250 plus players. We think we have an idea how it's going to go, but every year there are a couple of these stories that you think, how did this player get to this point? And it's a miracle because they work so hard, they put their passion into it. They're not scared of playing at some lower level. And of course, those opportunities we mentioned with the portal, obviously can open up doors that weren't open before. I love it. That's the part of the draft that we can talk arm length and three cone drill times and all that. But when you hear about players who have put their lives into football and doing so at schools that most of us have never watched or heard of, it's inspirational. It's pretty cool.
um, this is an interesting one because I gotta get your take here. So the Vikings drafted a kicker, Will Reichard, 230 overall pick out of Alabama. He's the NCAA points leader, Alabama's career leader for field goals and point after touchdowns. Dallas Turner called him a cold-blooded sniper during an interview on
Nice.
K-Fan. And the funny part is, as Vikings fans will know, we'll probably break him and stand over his prone body and laugh when this is all done. How do you feel about teams drafting kickers? And what do you think of Will Reichard? Because a lot of people are kind of like, you shouldn't have done this. You should have just waited for UDFA, even though like 4 went off the board right after Reichard was
Yeah.
selected.
I mean, I think you think about where they're kicking, right? Half his games are going to be in Minnesota. That's an advantage right there. I think in his biggest question was distance, and he kind of answered some of those questions both in the Rose Bowl when he hit a 2-yarder, I want to say, to tie the game and put the pressure, or no, not tie the game, give him a 7-point lead, I guess, right? And Michigan had to come down and tie it themselves. So I mean, pressure kick in a huge playoff setting from distance, and he made it comfortably. Kicked well. Was he at the Senior Bowl? Yeah, he was at the Senior Bowl and kicked well at the Combine too. Cam Little was the hot kicking name coming in this year. Everybody was raving about Little. The Stanford, the Arkansas kids got more buzz than Reichert and Harrison Mevis and guys like that. But I was finishing up, it's the last day of the Combine and they did the O-line drills and everything, and everybody's clearing out of there. And I'm finishing up my work up in the box up there, and I'm watching Reichert just consistently strike the ball and hit it straight. There weren't any clunkers. I mean, it was very, some guys like Chad Ryland last year, who was a 4th rounder out of Maryland, had that leg where you hear it, you hear the sound, boom, like it comes off his foot, and you think, that's some pop. But there were some funky looking misses in college, enough so that I thought a 4th round pick for that. Again, it's like 4th round and 7th round are 2 totally different zip codes as far as I'm concerned. So you take a punter or a kicker in round 4, they better be darn good. I mean, I'm talking top 10% at some point in their career, and hopefully for multiple years. If you're talking about a 6th or a 7th round pick, especially when there had been some earlier buzz on a kicker like Reichert, I'm fine with it. We cut 7th rounders all the time. The NFL teams do, right? And nobody bats an eye. If you're a corner, a safety, a linebacker, a wide receiver, a tight end, a guard, center, whatever, he's going to be on the practice squad this year. But if it's a kicker, there's somehow a stigma against these guys. Like, well, that was a wasted pick, but the others weren't. I don't get it. So, I think it's okay, and I'm fine with it because it wasn't terribly high, and you want to bring in some competition. And also, again, kind of like the JJ situation, he'll have to play some NFC North games outdoors, and we'll see about that. But I mean, consistent ball striker, pretty darn accurate, 80-ish% from 48 and under or something like that. That's pretty good. And again, big game experience as well.
And you look at, I think Vikings fans have a little bit of PTSD because of how poor Daniel Carlson turned out.
Sure. Right.
First of all, Daniel Carlson was a 5th round pick. And I mean, I shouldn't say turned out. The Vikings just had zero patience with it, but you trade up for him. He misses 3 or 4 kicks in Green Bay in his second career game. Mike Zimmer's on the hot seat the entire season, so he cuts him. He goes to Vegas. He can't miss a kick now, and he's one of the league's top kickers. Like I feel like, you look at Kevin O'Connell and Mike Daniels, the special teams coach here, they're going to be patient with this. There is not going to be a hair trigger if he misses a couple. Now, if he misses like 9 or 10 field goals in training camp,
right,
yeah, you probably have a problem. But I don't think you're going to have the same situation where like, we have to cut this guy and get a veteran in here because this isn't working out.
Yeah. I mean, you make a really good point too, which, like, look at a team like Green Bay, obviously last year with Carlson's brother, Anders Carlson. How many did he miss last year? And they were in, some critical situations. It does put a little pressure on him this year, but they kept him. They stuck around. They stuck with him. So, hell, I remember interviewing Blair Walsh years ago. He had that incredible rookie year. I think he was 8 of 8 on 50+ field goals, and then never quite the same after that. Kickers are a tricky study. So, I mean, I understand like the hardliners, the absolutists out there saying you never spend a draft pick on a kicker. Fine, I get it. But to your point, there's clearly some talent. Does he have otherworldly leg kicking ability? No. What he's just really, really consistent, a vast majority of the time. And maybe over time he can add a little more pop and have a little more distance. I mean, everyone's so obsessed with the kickers who can make those 55 and 60 yarders these days, but there's something to be said about the ones who can consistently make the, I would say these days 40 to 50. That's kind of the in-between range, if you will. Yeah, you still attempt plenty of those field goals, but the ones who can make them are kind of Justin Tucker, yeah, he can boom the big ones, but he just doesn't miss those kind of routine ones, if you will. So we'll see. Yeah, I mean, I think it probably will end up fine, but you never really know with kickers.
Now, we were talking about your chance at redemption. Here it is. I know you just mentioned Blair Walsh, so everybody's kind of like, personally, I remember a day freezing my ass off at the Gopher Stadium and watching him shank a kick into the Mississippi River in the playoffs, but that's another for another podcast.
Yeah.
I don't know if you got a letter grade or whatever, but what would you give the Vikings draft overall this year if we were to, ask you what you thought?
I think this is the first year where I didn't have like an official letter grade. I'm doing power rankings for NFL media right now. And, I'm trying to remember kind of how I phrased it or what I said. I mean, I overall like what they did. I don't think there were any picks that offended me. There was nothing in there that I thought, again, Kyrie Jackson, for as great a story as he is, he's going to be a, make it or break it kind of play. I mean, what's a boom or bust is what I was looking for.
Yeah.
So there's some variables there. Walter Rouse, as I said, I don't think has a super high ceiling, but the 2 first-round picks are obviously the money selections. And, again, JJ was my QB4. They got him as QB5. They didn't have to pay a lot, and he's going in a good situation. I mean, I think there's a chance he gets some Rookie of the Year sentiment, even if his stats aren't on bonkers. All he has to do is get in there, win some games. Again, I don't know how long Darnold's leash is, but if he goes in there and plays with the command that he did in Michigan, I think the rest will take care of itself. I really do. I don't think he's an incredibly, amazingly gifted guy, but I don't think he's going to leave a lot of meat on the bone. He's going to use all of his facilities, including his mind, to be successful. Dallas Turner, same thing. I can see him as a foundational part of this defense. I can see him as the kind of guy that Brian Flores stands on the table for 3-4 years from now for a contract extension. So, who knows, right? Maybe he's a head coach elsewhere. But again, I think those 2 picks, are really the backbone of this. And I would say, at worst a B and at best an A minus, somewhere in that range, I guess.
So if you're upset that I wasn't an A plus, his name is Eric Edholm, ERIC
No day
underscore
two picks. I can't.
underscore EDH. Yeah, they traded the future, just like Mel Kiper Jr. said. They went all in on Dallas Turner. They're a complete disaster now. No future for the Minnesota Vikings.
I can't go there.
Before I let you go, I got one more draft question because I'm out in Brookings. I cover the two-time reigning, defending South Dakota State Jackrabbits. They had two players drafted in the draft. You have Mason McCormick going in the 4th round to the Pittsburgh Steelers and Isaiah Davis going in the 6th round to the New York Jets. What do you like about those prospects, and what do you think of their fits as they head into the NFL?
Yeah, my first exposure, I'd seen Davis on TV, but my first time seeing him live was at the Senior Bowl, and I kept thinking, who is this guy who keeps, carving out 7, 10, 8-yard runs every touch, it felt like. So he was very impressive at that level, and I thought looked good in the workouts at the combine too. Certainly didn't look out of place. I mean, that there is a bit of a smell test for the small school guys. Do they stack up? And at no point did I feel like this guy was out of his depth, So I know there's a little bit of an injury history there, but 2-year producer with an NFL ready body. Speed to me is kind of overrated in a running back. So I think he'll be fine in that regard. I guess the biggest question is opportunity. Is he going to have to make it in some other fashion? Is he going to have to add more of a receiving game to his portfolio? I think he can do it. It's just that he didn't really get a ton of chances. Or can he beat out somebody behind Breece Hall in New York to get a number 2 or 3 running back job? Maybe that takes a year, but he was sort of he was either right at the end of my top 100 list or just outside of it for most of the pre-draft season. McCormick was too. He was another guy that really impressed me. And who was the other offensive lineman they had?
Garrett Greenfield.
Yeah,
signed with the Seattle Seahawks. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just 3 NFL prospects in 1 year. It's a great sign of health for the program. Obviously, you don't see that in most FCS schools, even in a bumper crop year or whatever. I mean, that was great. And McCormick looks smart, surprisingly athletic. I mean, again, if you'd have told me he played at Michigan, it wouldn't have shocked me, right? Because he crossed off or checked all the boxes you want to see. And I think could be a factor at any of the 3 interior positions. So, look, they drafted a center. He went to Pittsburgh, right? Yeah. So They drafted Zach Frazier. He's probably going to be a guard, probably a backup to start. But, could he be the game day 7th offensive lineman? Could be. He's got the versatility to do it. So I know they raved about him up there, and Pittsburgh's draft was terrific. The last 2 years, the Steelers have done great, and there hasn't really been a pick that I've felt like I didn't understand. So he just fell right in line with another strong draft.
It always feels like, there's the elite crop of guards in the NFL, and every team that doesn't have one is just scrambling. Right. Like, look at the Vikings for the past decade. They lost Steve Hutchinson in 2011, and they haven't been able to replace him. I was sitting here in the weeks leading up to the draft. I'm like, get Mason McCormick, go draft, make it some. This guy is awesome. He's got a nasty attitude on the field. He's a good guy off of it. And then you also have Isaiah Davis, who he's just a fun prospect to me, just because of his physicality, the way he runs. And Garrett Greenfield too. He had a tremendous workout. And then you have a whole bunch of UDFAs that signed. Dyshawn Gales, the Yankee brothers, Zach Hines signing. I apologize if I forget anybody else because I'm going off the top of my head here, but all of these guys, I think it's a great sign, like you mentioned, for the program. And it's going to be very exciting moving forward to see, who's next for South Dakota State.
Yeah, right. And their rivals, had a player drafted, Miles Harden from South Dakota, and one of their rivals, I guess. And North Dakota State has obviously built up a powerhouse up there. And this year, their southern neighbors got to upstage them a little bit in the draft, which is always nice. So yeah, I mean, it's cool. I'm a big FCS fan. I grew up in New England, and seeing a UNH player go in round 5 was crazy. And Dylan Lobby and So I appreciate those guys, especially the ones in this era who aren't transferring up and portaling up every opportunity they get. Like, I mean, obviously, it sounded like McCormick had his chances and probably Davis too. So good for them for sticking around and staying loyal, and they were rewarded for it.
So let's wrap things up a little bit. Why don't you tell us what you got going on at NFL.com these days?
Yeah, we've got the schedule release coming up soon. That's the big news that just dropped, and it'll be the 15th. And I've got a couple pieces that I'm working on right now for elements of the schedule, toughest schedules, things like that, and easiest rides and whatnot. And I'll start in June. Start looking at some of the 25 prospects. I've seen a few already, and at least just to get familiar with the big names, and then kind of trickle down from there. And man, before you know it, it'll be, that last June mini camp is when you say, all right, I got 3 weeks left of summer. Better enjoy them. So I'll have a couple trips and we'll make the most of it.
It's what I comically call, please don't get arrested. See, don't pull Rasheed Rice, whatever you do, don't.
It's arrest and negotiation season is really what it is in the NFL. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I know I mentioned it before, but just so the people know, where can people follow you on social media?
Yep. I'm at on Twitter or X at Eric with a C _ Edholm, EDHOLM. And say something nice to me. I mean, I've got Colts and Titans fans duking out over who gets to, kick the crap out of me first. I don't know who's going to get to the head of the line, but they weren't thrilled with my power rankings. And you know what? I can't blame them. I put them pretty low. So it is what it is. Comes with the territory.
Is it the I-90 pipeline? That's just a trigger point. You just, okay, Minneapolis, next year Green Bay, then we go all the way down to Indy, and that's
what it is. It'll end up being geographical, I think. And maybe you get the right two teams who band up together and say, let's take out Edholm out. Let's make sure this guy doesn't have a platform.
Seattle's got to get in on some point too.
Of course.
Coast to coast. Well, thank you for coming on the show today. We appreciate your time, Eric, but that's all the time we have for the Viking Age podcast today. We do this every Monday with a late week episode right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel. We're also in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day. But however you consume us, make sure you rate, comment, like, and subscribe. So so you never miss a new episode and we can spread the word to the masses. For Eric Edholm, I am Chris Schad. This has been the Viking Age podcast.